The old woman was humming to herself as she stirred her big pot. It had been a long time since anyone had come into her hut, so she wasn't sure why she was in such a good mood today. But it could not have anything to do with the fact that two young men were sitting outside of her hut, waiting for her to finish making their lunch. Could it? Deep in the woods lived an old woman deep inside her little cottage. She was always alone. Well, except for the animals who often visited her. The animals loved her because she would always share her lunches with them. And she made amazing lunches. Every day she would pick fresh vegetables from her garden, catch some fish from the stream nearby, and every once in a while she would even find some delicious mushrooms. She cooked all of these things up into huge pots of stew and left them out by her door for any animal who wanted some. Soon, the animals would arrive. Hawks, deer, squirrels, rabbits, foxes, you name it. They all showed up to enjoy the old woman's cooking. But she never minded. There was always enough for everyone. One day, however, something strange happened. Two young men came walking through the forest and stumbled upon the old woman's hut. They had been traveling for a long time and were both very hungry. They had almost given up hope of finding food when suddenly they saw the old woman's hut. The older of the two men knocked timidly on the door. "Excuse me," he called out. "Hello, is anyone home?" He knocked again, but there was no answer. He turned to his companion. "Looks like we won't get any lunch," he said dejectedly. Just then, one of the men noticed the big pot of stew sitting by the door. "Well, what are we waiting for?" he said excitedly. "Let's dig in." And without another word, he began to eat the stew. The other man looked around to make sure that no one was watching and joined his friend. The old woman was just inside the hut listening to the two men. She couldn't believe how rude they were. Not only did they barge into her house without asking permission, but they didn't even wait for her to finish cooking before digging in. But she had made plenty of stew, so she didn't mind. She just hoped that they would leave soon so she could have lunch with the animals. But after the two men finished eating, they both fell fast asleep. The old woman shook her head at their rudeness, but she invited them in for some tea. As the two men drank their tea, they told the old woman about how tired they were from traveling and asked if they could stay the night in her hut. The old woman agreed, but told them that they would have to sleep outside. "I'm sorry, but my house is very small, and I need my sleep," she said. The men thanked her and went outside to look for some firewood. But the old woman watched them leave with suspicion. She knew that they were untired from traveling, and that they had probably only pretended to be so that they could trick her into letting them stay in her hut. The old woman decided to go to bed early. She had a feeling that the two men were going to cause trouble, and she didn't want to get involved. As she lay in her bed, however, she heard commotion outside. She got up and cautiously opened the door. She peeked outside to see the two men rummaging through her things. "Hey, what are you doing?" the old woman shouted. Startled, the two men dropped what they were holding and ran outside. "Sorry, we didn't mean to bother you," the older man said nervously. "We just wanted to ask where we could find some food." The old woman stared at them suspiciously. She knew that they were lying, but she didn't want to cause a fuss, so she simply pointed in the direction of the forest and told them to go back out into the woods. The two men thanked her and ran off into the darkness. The old woman closed her door and tried to go back to bed, but she couldn't stop thinking about what the two men had been doing. She knew that they hadn't meant any harm, but she also knew that they wouldn't leave her alone. She needed a way to get rid of them, but what? The next morning, the old woman got up early and went to work. She made a huge batch of cookies and left them out by her door. She knew that the two men would show up eventually, and she wanted to have something to offer them. Sure enough, the two men returned and politely asked if they could have some of the cookies. The old woman agreed, but told them that they would have to earn them. "For every 5 cookies you eat, you will have to do 1 chore around my house," she said. Duh. The two men agreed and started eating the cookies. As the men worked around the old woman's house, she watched them with amusement. They were both very lazy and kept goofing off. But she didn't mind. She enjoyed seeing them try to do honest work for once. After the last cookie was eaten, the two men had completed several chores around the old woman's house. But the old woman told them that she still wasn't satisfied. "You two are lazy and useless. She said, "Why don't you go out into the forest and see if you can bring me back some ingredients for lunch?" The two men looked at each other in dismay. They hated the idea of working, but they had no choice. They grabbed some baskets and headed into the woods. The old woman stood by her door and watched them leave. She had a feeling that this would be the last time she ever saw the two men. She was right. The two men never returned. Instead, the old woman's afternoon was filled with the happy chatter of squirrels, rabbits, and birds. They all came to enjoy her delicious lunches, and she was happy to share it with them. The end.